Well, good morning. It's Mr. Wingeter, and today we are going to wrap up our discussion on the Revolutionary War. So this video is going to be pretty much all about review. So we're going to cover some of the major conflicts and battles of the war and go over just how the war for American independence sort of unfolded. So if you'll remember, back in 1775, right here in Massachusetts, you had Paul Revere, that he was running out in the middle of the night doing his famous midnight ride. You had the British that were going to come out over here. They were marching out of Boston, and they were going to leave downtown Boston right here, and they were going to go out and they were going to seize the weapons over here in Concord. That's where the Massachusetts militia had a stockpile of weapons, muskets, flints, bayonets, lead balls, cannons, all sorts of weaponry that was stationed here in the town of Concord. So the British, under General Gage, he sent a contingent of men to go and seize those weapons at Concord, Massachusetts. So over here in the Old North Church, that's where the signal was, up here in this tower right there. A lantern system was set up, a signal was set up, one if by land, two if by sea, to let the Sons of Liberty know that we're over here in Charleston, how the British were going. Paul Revere rides out, and there were a number of other riders as well. Paul Revere ends up being the most famous one in his midnight ride. And the British Army marches out of Boston, and they go up and they confront a group of militiamen here in Lexington on Lexington Greens, which is this triangle right there. Okay? So Paul Revere rides through. He says, the British are coming, the British are coming, the British are coming. Rouses the town folk up. The Minutemen all come over here to Buckman Tavern, where they sit and they wait. In the early morning hours, right after dawn, the British Army arrives. The Minutemen line up right here in Lexington Green, and there's a standoff. No one knows who fired that first shot. Somebody lets their, trigger finger get the better of them. Boom, they fire a shot. It's later written down as a poem in the 1800s that is called The Shot Heard Round the World. That pretty much kicks off the American Revolutionary War, which is different than the American Revolution. The Revolution is a political event. The Revolutionary War is a military event. So now we have the British Army firing on colonists here at Lexington, and that's what kicks off the war. The British easily defeat the colonists, who just couldn't stand up to the professional military army that was the British Army, which was unquestionably the best army in the world at the time, and they retreat. So the British, but they slow them down. The British then end up marching out towards where they are trying to get to, which is over here in Concord. Here, running from the north, you have the Concord River, okay? And when they get to Concord, the word has gotten out all over the countryside, thanks to Paul Revere and other riders that are letting everybody know that the British are marching on Concord, and the American colonists are able to build a defensive position here. When they get to Concord, the British Army finds where the weapons were supposed to be stored at, the armory, and it's totally empty. They had already gotten the word out, and they had taken all the guns and ammo and everything they needed out of there, and the British show up and they have to leave empty-handed. But they end up having a battle, the Battle of Concord, in which they try to attack the colonists some more. They're not going to put up with this insurrection. And so right here, you have a bridge that used to go across the river there, the Concord battleground, right here. This is where this went down, okay? And over here, you had a bridge, and this is where the colonists ended up amassing. The British have to try to cross this river, cross the bridge, and try to cross over into the actual river, and they're unable to break through the colonists' strength. The colonists beat them back. The British have to retreat 25 miles back to Boston. They're getting shot at the entire way. And the Massachusetts militia comes in behind the British, and the British are stuck in Boston, which is sort of a peninsula here. You have the river, the Charles River, the Boston Harbor, and they're stuck in there. Okay? The British were actually, a majority of them were camped right here in Boston Commons. That's where they had their tents. That's where they were stationed. And the colonists basically just build a fortified line across Boston, keeping the British inside Boston and not able to go back out into the countryside. The Americans also take up a firing position over here on Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill. And this will become problematic for the British. You'll recall the Battle of Bunker Hill. The British counterattacked. The famous line from Israel Putnam, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." So, basically hold your shot until you know you can hit them, until they're this close to you. Once they're that close, then you have a better shot of knocking them out. The Americans lose the Battle of Bunker Hill. The British are able to rout them only because the Americans ran out of ammunition, basically. So they have to retreat. Later on, the Continental Congress meets. It's adopted that General Washington, who was the colonel of the Virginia militia still at this time, remember he was the colonel of the Virginia militia back in 1753 when he kind of inadvertently started the French and Indian War. He's still in charge of the Virginia militia. He's a delegate to the Second Continental Congress, and it's voted that he, who has arguably the most military experience out of any colonist in America, should be elected commander-in-chief. So the Congress appoints him to do so, and he comes and he takes over the now Continental Army, which was the Massachusetts militia, basically, is adopted as the Continental Army. In the meantime, we have some other things going on, and I'm trying to get through this as quickly as I can, so that we're not, this video isn't 2 hours long. Over here, you have Lake George, you have Fort Ticonderoga over in here. Here we go. Here's Fort Ticonderoga. This was a very important place strategically for anybody to control. This is the fort there itself. Fort Ticonderoga is at the southern end of this lake system here, which gives you direct access to Montreal, which was another huge strategic point. So by having a fort at Montreal and controlling Fort Ticonderoga, you basically controlled this whole section here. All right. Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys, along with General Benedict Arnold, are able to go and take out Fort Ticonderoga. And from there, they take the cannons from Fort Ticonderoga, they row it over Lake George, haul it over the Berkshires, which is this mountain range here, and they bring them down into Massachusetts, over to Bunker Hill in Charleston, overlooking Boston. What was keeping the British in Boston was their ships. Once the Americans have the cannonades up here in the Charleston Heights, let me see if you can see this here. You can see how you have a rise in land over here in Charleston, and it overlooks the bay. Once you have that position, that height, and you have cannons there, you're able to do a lot. And the Americans actually did a really good job. Overnight, they built a works. And when they say works, what they mean is like basically a fortification. They worked all night, built a fortification with, they cut down trees and put the logs in front of the cannons and everything like that, and rolled the cannons in. And then when the sun rose the next morning, the British looked up, and now they basically have a fort on top of Bunker Hill here with cannons in place, which puts their ships in danger. The British ships, if you can imagine, this is Bunker Hill up here, that you have your cannons up here, and the ships are sitting down here on the water. Well, the ship's cannons can't fire up at that angle, but the cannons up here on the hill can fire and hit the ships. So the ships are sitting ducks. So the Navy's a sitting duck, and the British are now stuck on a peninsula. All right, the Army's stuck here in the Boston Commons. They're completely surrounded, and the British have to surrender Boston to General Washington and the Continental Army without having fired a shot. This was fantastic news, okay? This is not going to be how the rest of the war goes for the Americans, all right? We kick off the American Revolutionary War with, we lost Lexington, but that was really just the opening shots. That slowed the British down enough that we could get troops into Concord. We won the Battle of Concord. We trapped the British on Boston. We built the works on Bunker Hill. And then we're able to win the siege of Boston without really having to fire a shot. The British retreat and get on their ships, and they go over here to Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, and they leave. Washington knows that the next place that the British are going to attack is New York City. And this is going to be nightmarish, all right? Because here you have New York City is sort of, you have a couple of different islands. You have right here Long Island, and then you have Manhattan. Manhattan is where the majority of the city is, but you have Long Island here, which is just this massively, and this is why it's named Long Island, it's a long island with tons of little bays and lagoons and just places where at any point from here down to here on the west coast, on the east coast, the British can land troops. It's almost impossible to defend, especially when the British outnumber you. So Washington knows that they're going to try to take New York City, and that he has to defend this whole area here, which is going to prove impossible. There's 32,000 troops on ships arrive in New York Harbor, okay? The British land over here in Brooklyn, okay? They start to take the city streets in here, and then they move across the East River into New York. This is in August and September of 1776, and They move across, they start hitting different areas, and we're retreating and retreating and retreating. You have the Americans are kind of stuck in the southwestern part of Manhattan, while the British move in across the East River. We start to have to retreat back. At the same time, coming down Manhattan from the north is another contingent of the British Army. And we're going to have a hard time. Now we're getting flanked, and with the classic, pincer movement. You have a bunch of troops up here, British Royal troops up here, and a bunch of British Army troops that move across the East River, okay, and moving south across Long Island at the same time, pushing the Americans back. The Americans are stuck over here on the Hudson River, and they need to get out. They're camped down around here. Washington orders for the American Army to confiscate as many boats as they can. And they start to row the American Continental Army across the Hudson River into New Jersey. This fog moves in. This really thick fog moves in. And Washington orders a group of men to walk around the camp with pots and pans, clanking them, building up fires and keeping them going, and to just make a bunch of noise like there's a whole group of people there, because the British are camped out over here. And so they're monitoring this camp. Secretly, we're rowing across the river as many troops as we can. In the morning, when the fog clears, the British roll into that camp and there's no one there. It's like a ghost, okay? Had it not just been for his stupid, dumb luck, Washington and the Continental Army would have been captured right there in New York, and the war would have been over. Fortunately for the United States, there was this fog that made it so that no one could see the troops rowing across that river. Washington called it an example of divine providence, all right? The hand of God put this fog there. That's what he attributes it to. And he uses that term quite often in his own journals and writing. But the Americans are able to escape into New Jersey. They head up north, back into New York, where they're going to make it to West Point. This is another very strategic point. West Point, there's a fort there. In fact, this is where the U.S. Military Academy is today. There were several different forts. This is all, you have a bunch of high hills up here. We can do this. So you can see here, this is a really strategic point to control. You have the height advantage over the river, and in fact, you had several forts that were placed here. One of these forts, actually, on the east side, you also had some forts as well. And there was a chain that went across the river here to stop the British Navy from coming up the Hudson River. And so it was a really strategic, important place to control. And however, the British beat the Americans again. We lose. We have to retreat. Washington ends up over September, October, into November, into December, losing battle after battle after battle. In fact, 1776 is a pretty much disastrous year for the American forces. They were defeated. We were hanging by a thread. And Washington realizes that he's going to need a victory in order to keep the morale up. He knows that basically the way that this worked was you enlisted into the army for 1 year, and it was a calendar year. So from January 1st to December 31st, that was your term of enlistment. It's December, they're stuck in a camp called Valley Forge, okay? And that's here in Pennsylvania. Washington knows that he's about to lose his army, that if you're not going to re-enlist into an army that's losing the war, he needs a win, he needs a victory. So he gets some pretty good intelligence that tells him that there's a bunch of Hessian forces. Hessians were German mercenaries that were fighting for the British here, and they're stationed in Trenton. And this is around Christmas. And so Washington hatches a plan to attack the forces, the Hessian forces here in Trenton on December 24th. You'll notice right here, Washington crossing. Well, this is exactly where he crossed the Delaware River on December 24th, 1776. This massive blizzard rolls in. Again, this is like that hand of providence for Washington, helping him. You know, he again writes that phrase where it's God working behind the scenes to help the Americans, right? At least that's how Washington perceives it. But this blizzard rolls in. Whether you're going to chalk that up to dumb luck, divine providence, or just a coincidence, or whatever, that's what happened. There's a blizzard that rolls through. In fact, they have a hard time. They were supposed to take 3 divisions across the Delaware River. Washington is the only one that gets across. His division is the only one that gets across because the river, it's so cold it freezes. They can't row across the river. So Washington goes ahead with the plan, and he marches south now that he's on the east side of the Delaware River in New Jersey, and he marches down to Trenton. Meanwhile, in Trenton, what you have is the Prussians are like, well, it's Christmas. Imagine this. You're a soldier, you're a mercenary, you are German, you are in America fighting for the British. It's Christmas. Your family's not there, and there's a blizzard outside. What are you going to do? If you answered, get drunk, that's a pretty good answer because that's what they did. The way that warfare worked during this time period, you didn't fight during the winter. All right? It was just too hard. It was too difficult. There was the fighting season, basically started in the spring and went to the fall. Once snow starts falling out of the sky, you're pretty much done. Okay? So the fact that Washington is marching his troops down here on Christmas Eve during a blizzard, it was unthinkable to the Hessians. So they're getting loaded, they're getting drunk, and they pass out. Early in the morning on Christmas Day, 1776, the forces march into Trenton and just devastate the Hessians. They are stumbling out of their, buildings that they're sleeping in. They're hungover. Some of them are still drunk. They're completely caught off guard. The Hessian general is shot and killed during the conflict, and the Hessians have to surrender. Using the momentum that he has from Trenton, he then marches the rest of the troops up, once the other 2 divisions join him, up to Princeton, and they take Princeton as well. So 2 cities are taken out on Christmas 1776, which gives him enough of a victory. It's not even really a strategic victory as much as it was a morale victory. And with that, he puts enough encouragement into the troops that they re-enlist come January 1st and the war can continue. Fast forward to the next major conflict that we need to be concerned with is September of 1777. Okay, so you have a whole fighting season. It's getting towards the end of the fighting season, like I said, September. That's pretty much when you want to start wrapping things up and positioning yourself to be in a good position come the next spring. And that's exactly what the British are doing at this point. General Gage has been fired and sent back to England at this point for his mishandling of the whole Boston fiasco. General Henry Clinton is now in charge down here. And there's another general up here in Montreal named General Burgoyne. General Johnny Burgoyne. Gentleman Johnny, they called him. He was a dandy. He was very prim and proper and just, the exact spitting image of what you would think of a British general in the 1700s. I mean, these generals had big personalities and they were narcissistic. They wanted all of the glory themselves. If they didn't want to share the glory at all, they wanted to have it look like it was due to their strategic brilliance, their plans, their troops were disciplined because of their leadership. It was all about them and what they could achieve themselves. So they didn't like to share in honor and glory. But there's a plot that's hatched between General Clinton in New York and General Burgoyne in Montreal. And the idea is that over here in this New England area, in particular Massachusetts, that's really the heart of this rebellion, all right? That's where the Sons of Liberty are. That's where the Boston Massacre happened. That's where the Boston Tea Party happened. If we could just get rid of these guys over here and handle them, all right, it would be like stabbing the rebellion in the heart, and the rest of the colonies would then fall in line, all right? So we need to cut off the head of this rebellion, and that is in New England, all right? So if we can control and isolate New England, the British think, then we can end this stupid rebellion, right? And remember what I told you at the beginning of the year, that geography is the vehicle that moves history forward? Well, that's still true. We pay attention to the geography of New England. What you see here is you have, like I said, these strings of lakes here, Lake Champlain, Lake George, all right? You have Montreal, Fort Ticonderoga, and then just south of Lake George, you have right here the Hudson River. And the Hudson River meanders around over here and then goes directly south, okay, down into New York City and dumps into the Atlantic Ocean right there. So you have, if you can control this river section here between Burlington down to Albany and down to New York City, the British control New York City, then you'll geographically separate the rest of New England, and that's the plan. So Burgoyne is going to march his troops from Montreal, and Clinton is going to march his troops north from New York, and we're going to try to capture the American army in the middle and crush them, all right? And by doing that, we'll isolate the rebels over here in New England. But, like I said, personalities kind of get in the way. General Clinton has a bunch of troops over here in New York, And Philadelphia is not that far away. And that's where the rebel capital is, okay? That's where the Continental Congress is, and that really is the big prize, okay? And he's looking at it and he goes, if I could capture Philadelphia, people would say, wow, he just marched his own troops in there and he took the rebel capital. He must be a brilliant general. That guy knows how to fight a war. That guy captured the rebel capital. Wouldn't that be better than just, fighting one battle up here in, the freaking countryside of New York? Well, he certainly thinks so. So he sails his troops down into the Delaware River and actually hits Philadelphia, attacks it, and takes it over, not surprisingly. The problem is he didn't tell General Burgoyne that that's what he was going to do. So Burgoyne thinks that we're still going with the plan where Clinton's troops are going to march north and his troops are marching south. Well, now Burgoyne is unknowingly on his own, and he's camped outside of this little town right here called Saratoga. And that's where the Battle of Saratoga takes place. And the Americans, thanks to General Benedict Arnold, he charges in, he takes command, he wins the battle. He takes a bullet to the leg in the process. He's the hero of the battle. He actually was ordered to stay in his tent and disobeyed the orders and ends up winning the battle for the Americans. And this is a huge deal. Burgoyne has to surrender his sword to the Americans. The army is captured. The Northern British Army is captured. They have to surrender their guns to the Americans, and they have to march back to Canada, and they have to promise that they will not fight again in the American Revolution unless they want to lose their honor, which was a big deal to these people. All right, so if you made a promise, all right, look, you won, don't kill us, we'll leave, and we won't come back. All right, and you made that your word, and you didn't go back on that. And that was how the 18th century warfare worked. You might laugh at it now, but look, that's how it worked. So they leave. So you take an entire army out of the picture. In the meantime, you have over here Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, all at different times, are over here in Paris. Okay, they're over here in Versailles. Okay, this is where the French king lives in the palace at Versailles. Look at this place, schwanky, right? Beautiful castle, beautiful gardens, and they're trying to convince the French king that he should help out America. Now, I want you to imagine that I'm Benjamin Franklin and you are the King of France, okay? And see if you're going to go along with this plan, all right? Your Majesty, King Louis, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for having an audience with me. Listen, we know how much you dislike Britain, okay? Now hear me out. I know that you are a king, but we were wondering if you wouldn't mind helping us overthrow our king. Okay? That'd be great, right? I mean, I know you're a king too, and you kind of don't think it would look good for one king to help out a bunch of rabble overthrow their king, that might have negative consequences for you as a king, but hear us out. It'd be good, right? Help us out. Now, come on. You going to go for that? It's a hard sell, isn't it? When the British are defeated at Saratoga, that's when the French king finally decides that he's going to help back America. He needed to see that we were able to stand toe-to-toe with the British and actually win on our own before he'd help us out. Now he knows that we can actually pull this off. He's going to help. He's that upset with the British. It's a whole geopolitical thing. It's going to hurt Britain. And if it hurts Britain, it can help France. So he's going to help. A lot of people will say that Saratoga is a turning point. That's what I'm supposed to tell you. That's what is going to be on your STAR test. It'll be like, what was the turning point of the American Revolution? You're supposed to say Saratoga. All right, so there. I taught you it. That's what I'm supposed to tell you. The reality is turning points are stupid. Okay? I don't believe in turning points. There's no such thing as a turning point. The people that are experiencing all of these battles, the political spin and the diplomacy and the backroom deals in the palace at Versailles, all of it working together, they had no idea what the turning point was going to be. All right? Think of it in modern terms, all right? We just had a presidential debate the other day. Donald Trump is going out and he's doing all these rallies and everything like that. And Joe Biden is not doing as much rallies. He's taking COVID a little bit more seriously and everything like that. And you're like, wow, it looks like Trump has a lot more people motivated because a lot of people are going to his rallies. And so if you look at it, you'd be like, wow, that was a turning point. Well, no, maybe it wasn't. Because guess what? Last night at 12:30 in the morning, we found out that the president just tested positive for COVID-19. Okay? You don't know. My point is you don't know what's going to happen. You could look back a week ago and be like, yeah, Trump's doing great. He's going to win. He's going to win. And then all of a sudden, boom, he gets COVID-19. Maybe now he won't win. Maybe he will win. I have no idea. You have no idea at this moment what is going to happen in the 2020 election because, the president got COVID. That was totally we didn't think that was going to happen, and yet it did. All right? What else could happen down the road? We have no idea. They had no idea that Saratoga was going to be the turning point. They had no concept of this idea. They were still fighting the war. It's not like the British were like, man, that's Saratoga. That was a turning point. We're going to lose now. No, they're going to still fight the war. So are the Americans. It's going to go on. You have one army up here in Montreal that's taken out of the picture. You have another army down here in New York that basically split itself in half in order to take Philadelphia. So you have sort of half of an army and half an army. So one, we'll just say another army in the middle colonies. Down here in Charleston, you have a third army, all right? Now, second army, okay? We'll say the third army up in Canada was taken out of the picture. This army down here in Charleston is going to be controlled by General Cornwallis. Cornwallis is going to start going out and trying to push north, okay? And there's several battles that take place. The big one that we need to pay attention to is, this is such a small little place, I'm not even sure I can find it here on the wall. You had the Battle of Camden, and then you have the Battle of Cowpens, all right? I want to point something out. If you're looking for a town named Cowpens, you're probably going to have to type it in, all right? It's a small little place, but it's an important battle. Yeah, I'm going to have to look it up. There it is. All right. Look, tiny, tiny little place, right? Cowpens Museum. It's got a caboose for the museum, all right? That'll show you how, metropolitan this place is, all right? But at the Battle of Cowpens, an important thing happens. Cornwallis split his forces, and he sent his cavalry over to Cowpens, and they end up losing. So now he's on the defensive, all right? And if you have ever seen the movie The Patriot, the final battle, it doesn't say it's Cowpens, but it's Cowpens, all right? What they did was they sent the militia in to be the center instead of the Continental Army, the regulars, all right? And every time you sent the militia in, the British routed them, all right? And so they get out there, they fire one shot, they reload, they take a shot from the British, they fire a second and immediately run and retreat back, okay? And the British are like, charge, right? And they go in after them. They're chasing them down, right? And the Americans run over this hill, and they're running down the hill, and the British are like, come on, get them, we got them on the run. Well, when they get up over the hill, on the other side of the hill is the real American force, ready and waiting. The militia slide in underneath the Continental Army so that they have a clear shot. They take it, they charge, and they rout the British. And now that sets in action a series of retreats that General Cornwallis starts heading north, and the Americans, the Southern Army, starts to follow him. And he ends up putting himself here at a place called Yorktown. So he crosses the James River and puts himself on this peninsula. And the idea here is it's defensible, okay? You can see everybody coming. It's hard to get troops across the river, as we've noticed. You can defend this area pretty easily, and it's going to give them a chance to resupply and figure out how he's going to continue to prosecute the war. And it's not a big deal because there's no American Navy, right? And if he really gets into trouble, the Royal Navy can sail down from New York and come and pick him up. Well, that is until the French Navy rolls in right here and blockades the Chesapeake Bay. So now if the British Navy wants to get in here, they're going to have to fight the French Navy. And the French Navy's in position. So that means that they're here, they're sitting there, they're waiting for it. They have all their boats lined up with all their guns pointing that way. The British are going to have to come in like this, boom, they get shot. The British are going to come in like that, boom, they get shot. They have the advantage, all right? They've secured this area. And Cornwallis is stuck now, just like General Gage was stuck in Boston. He's put himself on a peninsula. Washington brings his troops down. General Rochambeau has his French army there. Between that and the French Navy, they start to work their way towards the British fort at Yorktown. Colonel Alexander Hamilton actually gets some action. He brilliantly suggests, take the bullets out of your gun. We're just going to use bayonets. He didn't want a single shot to give the troops away. He ends up storming some of the outer defenses. And if you look closely here on the map, you can see some of the old works and stuff like that actually in the grass still, all right, from the 1700s. See, these are fortifications that the British originally built, and the Americans have to work their way in to this defense network here and take it over and move up towards where Yorktown was, where the headquarters of the British Army were, and this is where eventually the British surrender. And when the British surrender at Yorktown, that pretty much signals the end of the war. There were some other skirmishes and other battles after Yorktown, but Yorktown's pretty much it. That's 1781 is when Yorktown goes down, and that pretty much ends the war. We win the war. We defeated the British. We couldn't have done it without French help, but now what you have, it's called Cornwallis Cove. Cornwallis ends up surrendering. The war's pretty much over at that point because you have now the American Southern Army, the American Northern Army combined down here, along with another French army and the French Navy versus one army left here in New York and the British Navy. And it's becoming too expensive. They can't continue on. The war is won. And so that's how the American Revolutionary War goes. I know that was a long story, but those are the major points and battles and how that all unfolded. So I hope that helps. This will be good for you to review all of the stuff that we discussed in the American Revolution. In particular, remember the battles. You have Trenton in particular, Saratoga, and Yorktown. Those are the real major battles that you have to know for the test. So that's all. Have a great weekend.